Hi, I'm Don Stater, and thank you for tuning into The Antidote. I want to wish everyone a happy September, which is National Recovery Month. Let's begin with what has become an all too common phenomenon. A video or a picture of a person who is overdosing on opioids released by the media or organizations to the public, purportedly to educate and warn against opioid addiction or put a face to the opioid crisis. A warning: the next few minutes of this video are graphic and will show images of people actively overdosing on opioids. Images like this, taken in Liverpool, Ohio, where this grandmother and her boyfriend overdosed in a car with a 4-year-old in the back. Or videos like this, that show a man shooting heroin on a public bus in broad daylight and subsequently overdosing outside of Philadelphia. And perhaps the most graphic and tragic of these videos is of a woman overdosing at a Dollar General store. This video tragically goes on for another 2 minutes, by the way. 2 minutes where no one helps the woman who is overdosing or comforts her daughter. At this point, let me state unequivocally that standing there and pulling out your phone and filming a person who is having a medical emergency is wrong. Whether it's a person having a heart attack, seizing, a person who's been shot, or a person suffering an overdose. Put down the phone, be a human being, and help the person rather than worrying about whether you have something you can share on TikTok or Facebook later. But there's a point where this lapse of humanity metastasizes into a systematic decision to discriminate and stigmatize against people with addiction. That point occurs when organizations or news media outlets perpetuate the stigma by showing these videos in order to publicly embarrass and shame people with opioid use disorders. That brings us to the topic of today's video, on stigma, treatment and recovery, and what we must work toward during this National Recovery Month and beyond. When it comes to stigma, let's focus on the news media. The woman who overdosed with her daughter present has a name. That name is Mandy McGowan.
Excuse me.
Mandy McGowan ran from cameras today, refusing to answer questions.
The video was posted without Mandy's consent. It spread across the internet on social media without her knowledge, and outlets like CNN, Fox News, The Washington Post, and dozens more, without her permission or input, published news stories about her. A person who was unconscious, suffering a medical emergency, with an acknowledged and life-threatening medical disease, had the most trying and difficult part of her life broadcast into millions and millions of living rooms. It was broadcast not to help her, not to bring awareness to the disease of addiction, but for the pursuit of clicks, eyeballs, and ratings. If you don't believe me, or believe that there's a double standard for patients with addiction, just think of this. When's the last time you remember a news station playing a video that shows in graphic detail someone having a stroke, someone who's seizing, someone who's dying from a heart attack, or bleeding to death from a gunshot wound? Why don't news stations show videos of medical emergencies? Because it's cruel, it's inhumane, it's wrong. It's high time that we ask journalists across the country to apply their own code of ethics to citizens with opioid use disorders and addiction. This code of ethics, put out by the Society of Professional Journalists, states that it's part of a journalist's responsibility to minimize harm, to show compassion, to avoid pandering to lurid curiosity, and to give private people right of control to their own information. Stigma is driven by viewing others as less human, less deserving of care or compassion, and after Mandy's video was released, she was labeled as the dollar store junkie, and has had to deal with hatred and comments like this posted on YouTube. Stigma is powerful, and it starts with labeling a person, then stereotyping that person, then excluding that person, and it ends in discrimination. It starts also with the language we use. If you want to care for something, you call it a flower. If you want to kill something, you call it a weed. When we call people junkies, addicts, alcoholics, we demean them. We feel justified in not providing them with the care they rightfully deserve. They are people, a person with an opioid use disorder, a person with alcohol use disorder. The person is not their disease. People who use drugs are not clean or dirty. Drug use is not drug abuse. Those are just labels. The science shows that the language we use drives our response to the person. For anyone who wants to know the proper language for describing the disease of addiction, there are wonderful resources put out by drugabuse.gov, Shatterproof, and the Pew Charitable Trust. Please read them, please know them. That brings us to the practice of medicine, where stigma and discrimination are sadly more common than treatment and care. Don't believe me? Maybe you'll believe Mandy McGowan, who is now 4 years into her recovery and who agreed to sit down with the Antidote to discuss her experience. It is just our honor to have you on our show today.
Thank you.
And Mandy, why did you agree to this interview?
To get my story heard.
Get your story heard.
Mm-hmm.
Do you feel like your story's not been fully heard?
No.
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 What do you think about the story that's been told about you or for you?
I think that the world viewed me as the person that was in that store on the floor that day, and not who I really am.
Was that the first time you've ever overdosed?
Yeah.
What was it like when you went to the hospital? How did you feel like the care was?
It wasn't that great because I needed help,
Yeah.
and they were so quick to take my kid. I remember a security guard was outside the door, and I remember I had my pocketbook, and as soon as DCF came to take my daughter, I saw the fentanyl bag in my pocketbook, and that was it. I took the whole thing and
Wow.
I tried to OD on purpose.
So you tried to kill yourself?
Yeah, I did.
Oh my gosh.
And then they released me.
Wow. What type of care did they give you when they released you?
No detox, no nothing.
No detox? No
Nothing.
naloxone for
Nothing.
home?
Nothing.
Did they mention treatment?
Nope.
Wow, so you had a full-blown addiction. You had come close to dying. You had come to a hospital. They had taken your daughter from you. You had tried to kill yourself in the hospital, and they released you.
Yes.
Stigma, perhaps more than any other factor, stands in the way of people seeking help for addiction, stands in the way of medical providers caring for patients with addiction, and stands in the way of building a system that produces and fosters recovery. Effective treatments for opioid use disorders have existed for over 80 years. Methadone was invented in the 1930s. Buprenorphine, naltrexone, and naloxone were invented in the 1960s. All have been approved to treat opioid use disorders and prevent overdose for decades. The evidence for them is tremendous. Methadone and buprenorphine decrease mortality by 50%. Naloxone treats overdose and saves lives. Naltrexone helps people maintain their recovery. It is a sad reality that the medical community often decides that these evidence-based, life-saving treatments are not worth applying to people who have the disease of addiction. 70 to 80% of patients with opioid use disorders, alcohol use disorder, and other addictions never get treatment, often because we never offer them treatment. Case in point, when Mandy showed up to the emergency department after her overdose, she deserved to be treated compassionately. She deserved to be started on medications for her opioid use disorder. She deserved naloxone and overdose training. She deserved a referral to definitive addiction treatment. That is the care that she deserved. But what she got from the health system was that she was watched for an hour or two and then released from the ED with nothing. Mandy's story is emblematic of society's inaction. When people watch her video, they cannot understand how a person could stand there and film rather than help her or her crying child. The people who filmed did call 911, but otherwise they did the absolute minimum. And in medicine, that's what we've done. We've done the absolute minimum. In Mandy's story, we are the people holding the phone, watching as others die, and families grieve, when we could actually be helping provide medication for addiction treatment, helping provide naloxone, helping save lives. But as a medical community, we continue in 2021 to actively choose not to help. even as our opioid overdose numbers continue to soar, even as our opioid crisis deepens. What happens when you actually treat opioid use disorder? Simple. You save lives. France, as a nation, had an opioid crisis every bit as bad as we have now. In 1996, they removed all barriers to care and made it an expectation that their physicians and medical system would treat opioid use disorders with evidence-based therapy. And over the course of a few years, they decreased their overdose rate by 79%. If we as a nation follow that model, we could save 70,000 American lives every single year. But in this country, we still hide treatment behind an X waiver, an OTP certification, a law called 42 CFR. These are barriers to treatment and an excuse many physicians use for why they won't or don't treat opioid use disorders. If we truly want to address the opioid crisis, we have to start by tearing down the personal and systematic stigma we've built around this disease. Now let's end by talking about people in recovery. Good people, people like Mandy McGowan. Since that terrible day in September of 2016, and without any help from the medical system, but with help from the recovery community, Mandy entered into recovery and has dedicated herself to helping those in need. She volunteered with outreach and harm reduction on the Methadone Mile in Boston. She currently works helping people struggling with homelessness and substance use disorders. Mandy McGowan is an amazing, big-hearted, beautiful person. This is Mandy's message on recovery for all of us on this Recovery Month. So now, with your recovery, tell me more about what you've been doing with your life and the time that you've gained back.
I work at a shelter. So I'm a diversion specialist at the Lowell Transitional Living Center, and I get the intakes and just meet with every single person, meet them where they're at and see if they can be housed, go to treatment, harm reduction, and just meet with them every day.
How is that for you as someone who's in recovery?
It's not as hard as I thought it would be, because it's not where I ever want to be again. I remember being that.
How do you break through and kind of communicate with them, or?
I try and just listen to them. People are so quick to talk over them. You know, this is what you need to do, this is what you should do, this is what you have to do. I just try and speak on what I went through, what worked for me, and you have to build a relationship with the person, because they have to trust you.
I trust you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I just say, just try and go to detox. If it doesn't work, you can come back. Let's try it again. Stick and stay. Build a network. Stay connected. Be proactive. Because it does get better. It's not easy, but it does get better every single day.
Yeah. That's a beautiful message.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I agree with you 100%. And that we want to build a future where the medical system, the legal system, etc., is there to help you rather than judge you.
Exactly.
And I'll end with this. When we see patients with substance use disorders, this is not what we should see. This is what we should see. The person on the floor is not Mandy. This is Mandy. Mandy and those like her are worth treating, are worth saving, and are worth fighting for. When we focus on human despair, when all we show is tragedy, that does nothing but further the stigma and hopelessness that families and people who struggle with opioid use disorders feel. It is not hopeless. There are treatments, there are medications, there is help, there is recovery, and we can create a system that makes this the norm rather than the exception. A sincere thank you to my good friend Mandy for being a face and a voice of recovery and for having the bravery and heart to share her story. It's a beautiful story. On behalf of the Antidote and our team, happy Recovery Month.